My name is Marcus, and I need to tell someone about what's been happening at Westfield Commons. I've been working night security there for 3 months now, and I'm starting to think I won't make it to month 4. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how normal this all seemed at first. Westfield Commons was once the pride of our town. Built in 1987, it was a sprawling 2-level complex with over 200 stores, a food court that could seat 500 people, and a central fountain that kids would throw pennies into while making wishes. For 20 years, it was the heart of our community. But like so many malls across America, it couldn't survive the rise of online shopping. Store by store, it emptied out. First, the big anchors left Sears, JCPenney, Macy's. Then the smaller shops followed. By 2018, only about 30 stores remained open, rattling around in a space designed for 10 times that number. The final blow came when the last anchor store, a discount electronics retailer, packed up in early 2019. The mall owners tried to keep it running with just the remaining shops, but it was hopeless. The place officially closed on March 15, 2019. I remember the date because my sister worked at the pretzel stand until the very last day. For 2 years, the building sat completely empty while the owners tried to find a buyer or figure out what to do with it. That's where I came in. I'd been unemployed for 6 months after getting laid off from the factory when I saw the job posting online. Night security guard, Westfield Commons. Easy work, good pay. Must be comfortable working alone. The pay was way $18 an hour, which was better than anything else I'd found. And the job description made it sound simple enough. Walk around an empty building, check doors, make sure nobody was breaking in or causing damage. I met with the property manager, a nervous little man named Henderson who seemed eager to fill the position quickly. He gave me a brief tour of the place during the day, showed me the security office, explained the basic duties. The whole thing took maybe 30 minutes. He asked as we wrapped up, "Why do you need security for an empty building?" I asked. "I mean, what's anyone going to steal?" Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "Insurance requirements," he said quickly. "Plus, we've had issues with vandalism. People breaking in to spray paint or party. Your presence should deter that." Something about his tone suggested there was more to it, but I needed the job. I started the following Monday. The first week was exactly what I expected. Boring, but easy money. The security office was located on the 2nd floor, overlooking the main corridor through a large window. It was a small room with a desk, a chair, a bank of monitors showing feeds from various cameras throughout the mall, and a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. The previous security company had left behind a logbook, but the entries were sparse and routine, all clear. No incidents. Checked all doors secure. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The routine was simple: arrive at 10, do an initial walkthrough of the entire mall, then return to the office. Every 2 hours, I was supposed to do another patrol, checking all the entrances and exits, making sure everything was secure. Between patrols, I could pretty much do whatever I wanted as long as I stayed alert and responsive. For the first 2 weeks, I actually enjoyed it. The mall during the day had been eerily quiet, but at night it was completely silent except for the hum of emergency lighting and the occasional sound of the building settling. I'd bring books, catch up on shows on my phone, sometimes just sit and think. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. The storefronts still had their security gates down, and many still had signs in the windows. Store closing sale. Everything must go. Thank you for 20 great years. Walking past them felt like wandering through a graveyard of American retail. The old Spencer's still had posters in the window advertising movies from 2018. The GameStop had a display for Red Dead Redemption 2. Time had stopped here, frozen at the moment of death. The anchor stores were the worst. Vast empty spaces that had once housed department stores, now just concrete floors and exposed ceiling fixtures. My footsteps would echo strangely in these spaces, creating sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But I was getting paid well to be bored. and I'd had worse jobs. The first sign something was off came during my third week. I was doing my 2 a.m. patrol when I noticed that one of the stores an old jewelry shop called Treasures had its security gate partially raised, just about 2 feet, enough for someone to crawl under. I checked my logbook. The previous guard had noted that all gates were secured during his final round. I knelt down and peered under the gate with my flashlight. The store appeared empty, just bare display cases and stripped walls. But something felt wrong about it. I radioed the day supervisor, Henderson, but got no answer. I tried the emergency contact number he'd given me, but it went straight to voicemail. Finally, I decided to document it in the logbook and deal with it in the morning. But here's the thing, when I came back an hour later to check on it, the gate was completely down again. Locked tight, like it had never been moved. When I mentioned it to Henderson the next day, he seemed annoyed. "The gates are old," he said dismissively. "Sometimes they stick, sometimes they slip. Just make sure they're secure when you leave. That's all that matters." But I knew what I'd seen. That gate had been raised deliberately, not slipped from some mechanical failure. That's when I started paying closer attention to details. And that's when I began noticing other things. Little things at first. A chair in the food court that I was sure had been pushed under a table, but was now sitting out in the open. A door that I'd checked and found locked, but was now slightly ajar. Footprints in the dust that weren't mine, or at least didn't match the pattern of my boots. Then I started hearing the footsteps. It began on a Tuesday night around 2 a.m. I was sitting in the office when I heard what sounded like someone walking through the main corridor below. Slow, deliberate steps echoing off the empty storefronts. The sound was distinct, definitely human footsteps, not the random settling noises I'd grown used to. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, thinking maybe a homeless person had found a way inside. It wouldn't be the first time someone had broken into an abandoned building looking for shelter. But when I got to the main corridor, there was nothing. Just empty darkness stretching in both directions. The footsteps had stopped the moment I left the office, like whoever was making them had heard me coming. I spent 20 minutes searching the area, checking every storefront, every alcove, every possible hiding place. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. I chalked it up to acoustics. Big empty buildings can play tricks on your ears, make sounds seem to come from places they don't. Maybe it was just the building settling, and the empty corridors were amplifying and distorting the noise. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that, always around 2 a.m., always stopping the moment I tried to investigate. By the end of the week, I'd developed a theory. Maybe it was an animal, a cat or a dog, that had somehow gotten trapped inside when the mall closed. Animals could move quietly when they wanted to, could hide in places I hadn't thought to look. It would explain the footsteps, the open doors, even the footprints in the dust. I started bringing cat food on my shifts, leaving small piles near the areas where I'd heard the sounds. If there was an animal in here, maybe I could coax it out, help it escape. But the food was never touched, and the footsteps continued. During my fourth week, the incidents escalated. I was doing my midnight patrol when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The fountain in the center court, which had been dry and dark since the mall closed, was running. Clear water cascaded down the 3 tiers, and the lights underneath were somehow working, casting an eerie blue glow across the empty space. The sound of running water in that silent building was almost deafeningly loud. I could hear it echoing off every surface, creating a constant whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I immediately radioed Henderson, waking him up at home. "That's impossible," he said, his voice thick with sleep. The water and electricity to the fountain were shut off when the mall closed. The pipes were drained. The pumps were removed. There's no way it could be running. "Well, it is," I told him. "I'm standing right in front of it." "Document it and move on," he said irritably. "I'll have maintenance check it out in the morning." But As I stood there watching the water flow, trying to figure out how this was possible, I noticed something in the fountain's surface. At first, I thought it was just the distortion from the moving water, but as I looked closer, I realized I was seeing a reflection that shouldn't have been there. There was a figure standing behind me, tall, unnaturally thin, with what looked like long dark hair covering its face. It wasn't moving, just standing there in the reflection, watching me. My heart hammering, I spun around to confront whoever was behind me. Nothing. Empty air. When I looked back at the fountain, it was dry again. The lights were off. The only sound was my own ragged breathing echoing in the silence. I ran back to the security office and locked the door. That's when I knew for certain I wasn't alone in this place. The next morning, I called Henderson again, demanding answers. Has anyone else reported strange incidents? I asked. Previous security guards, maintenance workers, anyone? There was a long pause. What kind of incidents? I told him everything: the footsteps, the fountain, the reflection, the open doors. As I talked, I could hear him getting more and more uncomfortable. Look, Marcus, he said finally. You're not the first guard we've hired for this job. The previous company, let's just say, they had trouble keeping people in this position. What kind of trouble? Guards would quit after a few weeks. Claims about strange noises, unexplained incidents. Probably just stress and imagination, you know. Night shifts can mess with your head, especially in a place like that. So this has happened before. I'm sure it's nothing, Henderson said quickly. Just your mind playing tricks. The important thing is that you're doing your job. The building is secure. Nothing's been stolen or damaged. That's what matters. But I could tell he was lying, or at least not telling me everything. That night, I decided to gather evidence. If something was happening, I wanted proof. I set up my phone on the security desk to record during my rounds, positioned to capture the main corridor where I'd been hearing the footsteps. I went about my usual patrol, checking doors, making notes in the logbook. Everything seemed normal until I got back to the office around 2:30 a.m. and reviewed the footage. For the first hour, everything was normal. The corridor was empty, dimly lit by emergency lighting. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., something appeared at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was just a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness. But as I watched, it began to move toward the camera. And it moved wrong. Not like a person walking upright, but like something crawling along the walls and ceiling simultaneously. The shadow grew larger as it approached, stretching and contorting in ways that hurt my eyes to watch. Just as it was about to reach the security office, the recording cut out. When it resumed a few seconds later, the corridor was empty again. I found my phone on the floor, completely drained of battery even though it had been at 100% when I started recording. My hands were shaking as I plugged the phone back into charge. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a glitch, a problem with the camera, some kind of digital artifact. But deep down, I knew what I'd witnessed was real. The next few nights were a nightmare. The incidents became more frequent, more intense. Doors would slam shut as I approached them. Lights would flicker on and off in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain areas, leaving me shivering even in my heavy jacket. Worst of all, I started feeling watched. Constantly. Even when I couldn't see anything, I could feel eyes on me, following my every move. The sensation was so strong that I'd spin around randomly, searching for whatever was observing me, but I never saw anything. During the day, I researched the mall's history, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. What I found didn't make me feel any better. Westfield Commons had been built on the site of an old cemetery, Riverside Cemetery, established in 1892. When the developers wanted to build the mall, they were supposed to relocate all the bodies to a new cemetery across town. According to the records, they moved 347 graves. But there was a discrepancy. The original cemetery records showed 384 burials. 37 graves were never accounted for. The official explanation was that the records were incomplete. that those graves had probably been moved years earlier or had never existed in the first place. But reading between the lines, it seemed more likely that the developers had simply built over them, hoping nobody would notice or care about a few forgotten graves from over a century ago. I also found newspaper articles about incidents at the mall over the years. More than you'd expect for a normal shopping center. Security guards quitting without notice. Customers reporting strange encounters. A handful of unexplained deaths, mostly elderly people who'd suffered heart attacks, but a few younger victims too. One article from 2003 particularly caught my attention. A teenage girl named Sarah Chen had been found dead in the old Brookstone store, apparently from a heart attack. She was only 16 and had no history of heart problems. The article mentioned that she'd been found with a look of absolute terror on her face, and that other shoppers had reported hearing screaming from the store. But when security arrived, they found only Sarah's body. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Westfield Commons was genuinely haunted, and not by some benign spirits, but by something angry, something that didn't want people in its space. But I couldn't quit. I needed the money, and jobs were still hard to find. So I developed strategies for coping with the supernatural activity. I started carrying a small digital recorder with me at all times, hoping to capture evidence of the voices I'd started hearing whispers just at the edge of perception, always in languages I couldn't understand. I brought a thermometer to document the temperature drops. I even started carrying a small bag of salt, having read somewhere that it could ward off evil spirits. None of it helped. 3 nights ago, I saw it clearly for the first time. I was checking the old Macy's Anchor store around 1:30 a.m. when I heard something that made my blood freeze, a child laughing. Not the happy laughter of a kid at play, but something wrong, distorted. It echoed from somewhere deep in the store, beyond the empty clothing racks and bare display cases. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to run, to get out of there immediately. But I'd been dealing with this for weeks now, and I was tired of being afraid. I needed to know what was happening. I followed the sound deeper into the store, past the customer service desk, past the fitting rooms, toward the back corner where the children's section used to be. My flashlight beam revealed empty floor space and a few forgotten fixtures, but as I got closer to the source of the laughter, I saw something that didn't belong. Dozens of mannequins were arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. Child-sized mannequins with blank, featureless faces and glassy eyes, all turned inward toward the center of the circle like they were part of some ritual. But that wasn't the worst part. In the middle of the circle sat something that I can barely bring myself to describe. At first glance, it looked human, a figure sitting cross-legged like it was part of some twisted tea party. But as my flashlight beam hit it directly, I could see that it was wrong in every conceivable way. It was too tall, even sitting down. Its limbs were stretched and distorted, like someone had taken a normal person and pulled them on a rack. Its arms were impossibly long, reaching nearly to the floor even from a sitting position, and they ended in hands that had too many joints, fingers that bent in directions fingers shouldn't bend. But its face was the worst part. It had no face, just smooth, pale skin where features should be, like an unfinished sculpture. No eyes, no nose, no ears. Just a mouth that stretched impossibly wide across the lower half of its head, filled with teeth that looked like broken glass and razor wire. As my light hit it, the thing slowly turned toward me. The motion was fluid but wrong, like its neck could rotate much further than any human neck should. And then it spoke my name in a voice that sounded like radio static mixed with the screaming of metal on metal. Marcus. I ran. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, knocking over displays and crashing through the empty store until I burst out into the main corridor. I didn't stop running until I reached my car in the parking lot, where I sat shaking and gasping for breath until sunrise. I called Henderson from my car and told him I was sick, that I wouldn't be in that night. He seemed annoyed but didn't press for details. I spent the day researching everything I could find about the thing I'd seen. I scoured internet forums about paranormal encounters, read academic papers about supernatural manifestations, even called a few local priests and paranormal investigators. What I learned didn't comfort me. The description I gave matched several different types of malevolent entities, shadow people, doppelgangers, demons that fed on fear and terror. But the common thread in all the accounts was that these things were drawn to places where people had died in fear or anguish. And once they claimed a territory, they didn't let go easily. The mannequins bothered me almost as much as the creature itself. I remembered seeing them when I first toured the mall. They'd been stored in the old Sears warehouse space. Dozens of them piled up like corpses. Someone or something had moved them to the children's section and arranged them in that circle. But who? And why? I should have quit then. Any sane person would have. But I kept thinking about my bills, my rent, the fact that I'd been unemployed for months before this job. So I went back the next night, telling myself I'd just stay in the security office and avoid the anchor stores entirely. That plan lasted about 4 hours. At 2 a.m., every light in the mall went out simultaneously. Not just the regular lighting, even the emergency lights, the exit signs, everything. The darkness was absolute, so thick I couldn't see my hand in front of my face even with my flashlight. And in that darkness, I heard footsteps. Not the slow, measured steps I'd grown used to, but rapid, erratic movements coming from multiple directions at once. It sounded like a crowd of people running through the corridors, but the footsteps had an odd quality, too light, too quick, like whatever was making them didn't have normal human weight. Then the whispers started. Dozens of voices, all saying my name in different tones and languages. Some were pleading, others angry, a few almost seductive. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls and creating a cacophony that made it impossible to think clearly. I felt something brush against my shoulder, fingers trailing across my jacket. Then something touched my face, cold and damp and wrong. More hands reached for me in the darkness, grabbing at my clothes, my hair, my skin. I swung my flashlight wildly, but it still wouldn't work. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was black and unresponsive. I was trapped in complete darkness with things that shouldn't exist, things that wanted to touch me, to drag me away into whatever hell they'd crawled out of. The touching got more aggressive. Something with claws raked across my back, shredding my jacket. Another set of hands grabbed my ankles, trying to pull me off my feet. I could feel breath on my neck cold, smelling like decay and old earth. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The lights came back on, my vision returning in a painful rush. I was alone in the security office, but I wasn't in the same position I'd been before the lights went out. I was standing in the center of the room, and arranged around me in a perfect circle were the mannequins from the children's section. All of them were facing me, their blank faces somehow managing to convey malevolent attention. And behind them, barely visible in the shadows cast by the overhead lights, I could see the creature. It was standing now, revealing its full impossible height, at least 8 feet tall, with arms that hung down to its knees. It was watching me with that smooth, featureless face, that terrible mouth stretched in what might have been a grin. I stared back for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, without breaking eye contact, it spoke in that same static-filled voice, "Tomorrow." The lights went out again for just a moment. When they came back on, everything was normal. The mannequins were gone, the creature was gone, and I was sitting at my desk like nothing had happened. But my jacket was still shredded, and there were scratches on my back that I couldn't explain away. I'm writing this during my break tonight. It's 1:45 a.m., and I can already hear the footsteps starting in the corridor. They're different tonight, faster, more aggressive, more purposeful. And I swear I can hear more than one set, like there's a whole crowd of them out there. I think they're getting impatient with their games. I think they're done playing with me. I've decided this is my last night. After my shift ends, I'm never coming back. I don't care about the money anymore. Don't care about finding another job. Nothing is worth this. Nothing is worth being hunted by things that shouldn't exist in a place that should have been demolished years ago. But I'm scared I won't make it until morning. The footsteps are getting closer, and my flashlight just started flickering. The temperature in the office is dropping rapidly, and I can see my breath-forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. Something's moving in the corridor outside. Multiple somethings. I can see shadows passing by the window, shadows that don't match any human proportions. My phone just died, even though it was fully charged when I started my shift. The radio isn't working either, just static when I try to call for help. I can hear them outside the door now, scratching, whispering, calling my name. The door handle just turned. If you're thinking about taking a night security job at an abandoned mall, don't. Find something else, anything else. Work fast food, clean offices. Do whatever you have to do, but don't come here. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some things should stay buried.